Stories Live, the birthday edition. I'm Amy Armstrong, and Griffin, who's going to be starting us off, Deb Courtney, Rebecca Hodgkins, Julia Allen, and Tom Broderick. So I'm going to go ahead and do my intro for Griffin Schwartzel. So Griffin is a professional hitman who spends his spare time playing bridge with old ladies. He now does it via Zoom only due to the quarantine. Before pursuing this violent profession, he often worked with orphans who were born during leap year and often had to remind them that even though they looked old, they had not aged out of the system yet. His favorite color is purple. He enjoys cheese, fine liquor, and silly walks.
Hello out there, ladies and gentlemen, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I hope you're doing well this evening. Some of what Amy told you about me is true. Some is not. As for what? Well, that's for you to figure out. Tonight I have a little story for you called 666. Let's begin. Tomorrow was Ma Fitch's birthday, and Al needed a cake. Al had a single $20 bill to his name, set on his bedside table with a note from his father. Once the deed was done, there would be no reason to leave the house again. So he sat and he waited, Aaron tucked away until needed, until some external thing would help it grow into what he needed. Tap, tap, tap. Wood chips make a particular sound when they hit a second floor suburban window. Al looked down into the front yard, unsurprised to see Cyrus, the Slayer-jacketed teenager who already knew pebbles might crack the thin glass Ma Fitch brought for her windows. Al waved, then picked through the heap of clothes on his floor for something clean. Dressed in black and denim, he put his ear to the door for a moment, breath held. He heard first nothing, then footsteps, then a door closing. When he could hear the shower running, Al eased his door open, then closed behind him. He took each slow step down the stairs to the front door. With house key and shoes in hand, he slipped away into the summer evening. Now bearing a predatory grin, Al crept along the side of Ma Fitch's blue BMW. Cyrus still stood in the yard, lost in thought, waiting. "Hey kid, you want some candy?" called Al. Cyrus spun around, then smirked. "Hurry up, nerd, the store's gonna close," said Cyrus, half jogging back to his grubby gray sedan. Al slid into the passenger's seat, pulling on his shoes as they drove up. "I've been waiting for you all day, dude," said Al. "Did you just wake up?" "You know it, dude." Cyrus smirked as he turned on the radio. Loud metal music filled the little car. "So what's up?" "Dad left me a 20 for Mom's cake," Al half shouted over the music. He pulled the bill out of his pocket, waving it about as proof. "Mind if we hit the grocery store on the way? I'll cover dinner." "Don't you need a fridge?" "Nah, those things are packed with preservatives," Al scoffed. "Let's keep it in the trunk. It'll be fine." "You sure that's gonna be okay? I can probably sneak it into my fridge if you need to," Cyrus offered, turning down the music. "Fuck it, dude, the cake," Al hand waved. "The cake will be fine. Your funeral. And if you've got no other choice, you know you can follow my voice." The beater couldn't make highway speeds from most of the on-ramps in town, so with cake and trunk, the boys drove south before they could go north. On the way, as the radio blared once more, they laughed and talked. "So do you have any plans after graduation?" asked Al. "Community college," said Cyrus. "I'll get my general education stuff done while I figure out what I'm going to do after that." "Good plan. Are you going to be okay with your dad for another 2 years?" Cyrus bit his lip. "I've made it so far," he said, quieter. "You know, you don't have to stay in town for my sake," said Al. "It's 2 years for me no matter what. You only have to make it through this year." "And leave you behind?" Cyrus laughed. "Come on, you know I'm not going to do that. You don't even know how to drive. How are you going to function without me around?" Al looked aside, hiding a bashful smile. "I'd be pretty doomed without you, yeah," he allowed. It wasn't a comfortable thing to admit, but he knew it was true. Next year, Cyrus might teach him to drive in the gray sedan. Once Al turned 18, he could just pass a test and get his license. No permit needed. Then, when the time was right, they would pack what little they had and leave. Al and Cyrus could take turns behind the wheel, driving nonstop to LA, New York, Montreal, a new home, and a new life. I said, "Kiss me, you're beautiful. These are truly the last days." With no cash to spare, the boys drifted like evening shadows through the racks and shelves of the game shop. Al carried and flipped through the pages of a comic about a serial killer. Cyrus owned the book, but Al never asked to borrow it. "Hey, Al, do you still have your Yu-Gi-Oh cards?" Cyrus's voice was a little hushed. Al looked up from the book. Cyrus was holding an expansion pack that featured a character Al didn't recognize. Must be new. Had it really been so long? "No, do you?" Al matched Cyrus's volume. Cyrus shook his head. They continued their procession. Al pointed out a t-shirt with a cartoon they'd watched as kids. It had been canceled 8 years ago. Cyrus found a graphic novel about a superhero who had once been on his pillowcase. The series had since been rebooted 3 times, and under the mask was someone he didn't recognize. "Do you want to get out of here?" God bless all petty thieves with tins of oysters up their sleeves. Cyrus and Al climbed to the top of the low rope structure on the far end of their high school's track. Al carried bagged sandwiches in the crook of his arm. Cyrus was already tearing into the trading cards that left the comic shop in his deep pockets. "Look at this new fusion ability," Cyrus said. "You'd have to build a whole deck around it, but if you can get this guy out..." Al handed Cyrus one bag, then opened his own. "Yeah, it feels like the new stuff always makes the older cards feel too weak," Al said. "Right? Like they have to keep one-upping what they did before. Makes it hard to keep up, right?" Al took a bite of sandwich. He tried to remember the strategies he'd memorized a year or 3 before, but it was fuzzy and distant. They shuffled their decks, cut, drew hands. Cyrus played, then Al played, then Cyrus played again, then Al put his cards down. "Ma said she was going to kill me again last week." "Fuck." "Golf club." "Your dad's?" "Mine. The one she wasted all that money on." "You don't even like playing. Didn't she get those from the thrift store?" "Yeah." Cyrus held Al close. Cards fluttered down between wooden slats. History rhymes with itself. Before they left, sometime around midnight, the boys pissed their names onto the front of the building, standing close enough the security cameras couldn't see. They held hands. And that's it. That's all there is to them. Thank you for joining me, and give a round of applause for all of the rest of the readers you're going to see this evening, as well as our wonderful host, Amy Armstrong.
Oh, yeah, of course. Just the bestest. Well, thank you, Griffin. All right. So I will go ahead and let you, I'm sure you've got somebody to kill, so I'll let you get back to that.
Oh, no. Don't worry. All of this is mine. This is all my blood. It's cool. It's cool.
It's only your blood.
We're good. We're good.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's see. So now we have our next guest, who's Deb Courtney, with a very different kind of story. I'm just going to pull up her intro here. So Deb holds a degree in fiction from the University of South Florida, where she was a Saunders Scholar in Fiction. She has had numerous short stories published and has worked as a freelance journalist. Her background includes more than 20 years in technical project management, and she's currently vice president of Pikes Peak Writers. Right now, that's WRITE now, a self-coaching book about writing as a world-class procrastinator comes out in early fall 2020. Deb hosts the popular Write Drunk, Edit Sober improv writing series monthly in Colorado Springs. And she's doing that online as well with Zoom meetings now. We used to all meet at Bar K, and we haven't been able to do that for a while, and it's very sad because I miss our competitive drinking, especially on my birthday. So, I need to get this crawler off of here. We don't need to know about Twitter, Griffin's handle anymore. Let's show the important stuff. There we go. Okay, so I will get you in the stream here, Deb. I think. Oh, yes, she's coming. There she is. Ah! All right. So, yeah, good luck. I will get my face off of here and let you have at it.
Just a quick setup. I'm reading an excerpt from a novel, chick lit, divorced woman, not a big fan of herself these days, struggling. This chapter is called The Other Gerard. At the sound of the hyena-like laugh, Else felt her ears perk up. If she'd been a dog, they would have stood at attention and swiveled in the direction of the sound. It was loud. It was as if a man were channeling his idea of an elderly woman with a 2-pack-a-day habit. It was unmistakable. It was obnoxious. It was Gerard 2.0. She turned her head in the direction of the sound, and there he was, shaven completely smooth. Apparently it took an hour every time he shaved his entire body, or so he'd said. He was dressed well enough in clothing that was very expensive, clearly, but which was not cut for his slightly stomach-heavy physique. Ah. What the fuck, she said out loud, to no one in particular. Else was at a wedding. 2 of her closest friends were getting married, an act that Else swore repeatedly restored her faith in love and marriage overall. She was in the midst of assisting with final decorations at the local music club that had offered to host, as a concession to the bride and groom, both local musicians, surrounded by friends and acquaintances, and for the life of her could not figure out what Gerard 2.0 was doing there. Yes, she'd introduced him to some of these folks during the 5 weeks or so they'd done something like dating. But was that really enough to merit inclusion in a celebration of love and commitment? And was he with? Yes, of course he was. Gerard was with a date who was wearing a dress that was clearly cut too low for a wedding and too much eyeshadow, and if Else was not mistaken, a bit too much bleach in her hair. Gerard, of course, was with a date. And his date was hanging on his arm in his every word in that ridiculous, annoying fucking laugh. Elsie, she heard behind her. She cringed. That voice. She'd lasted 5 weeks seeing him once a week because she'd been in a phase where she thought it was a good idea to try doing things opposite, like dating men who she would never date because they weren't as attractive as she thought they could be or as accomplished. Nice, normal men. Nice, normal men with opposite stagnatus bone structure and weird laughs and quasi-effeminate mannerisms instead of her typical high beta or alpha. It had, not worked out, and Else had quickly reverted to type. Her type. Too young, unavailable, unemotional, too far away to matter. The breakup had not gone well, though Else held that after 5 dates, the concept of breaking up was overkill. She preferred stop seeing. No longer want to date. Not interested in moving further. But breaking up? Though he had already introduced the idea of a trip together and then also the idea of meeting his son. So technically, he was one of those Insta relationship guys. And while there might have been any of several hundred annoying traits that might have made her run for the hills, it really was the Insta relationship. The level of commitment he inferred from 5 dates that sent her running for cover. That and that annoying fucking laugh. The breakup conversation had not really gone that well. She'd not answered his calls for 24 hours, ignored his increasingly frantic texts. She knew it was a breakup call for him, and she knew she had to make the call, but she prided herself on considering other people's feelings, worrying about hurting other people, and she tried to avoid hurting other people when she could, so she gave herself the luxury of avoiding him for just a short while. "You're breaking up with me, aren't you?" he'd said when she finally returned his call. She'd opened with, we need to talk. So the assumption had been a fair one. He was annoying, but not stupid. He asked why. Then he asked why again. And then he asked why again when her initial explanations did not resonate with him. So I told you I don't date very much, she'd said, mentally crossing her fingers behind her back at the not quite truth of the statement. She was relying on the way she defined dating as a fallback for not quite lying if she were not quite telling the truth. She went out with people a few times, but in order to constitute dating in her mind, there had to be a several-month commitment. So generally, she just didn't date. She went out with someone a few times, and they either settled into the entourage or she was just not interested enough to continue. Hence, no real dating, no actual relationships, just a series of drinks with randoms. Clearly, she was going to hell, but since she was well aware of this fact, mostly she just elided over it or deleted it from conscious thought and stuck with whatever felt closest to, not lying. See, I'm bad at dating, and you're really very nice, and any woman would be happy or proud or privileged to have you, but she grasps for something that would not exactly be lying again, but which would be truthy, and which would leave him some sense of pride. The ultimate, it's not you, it's me. I just am still significantly not ready for anything that looks like the relationship you describe, like you seem to want. And I'm practically having panic attacks thinking about it, and I guess I still think of relationships as a trap, and I'm just freaked out, and it's not fair to keep you involved with me when you have so much to offer someone who's in the right place and who can appreciate you like you should be appreciated. She took a deep breath and let the silence sit. Okay. It was a personality flaw, her truthiness, her lyingness, but one she relied on, telling herself it was okay to manipulate the truth if the end result was not hurting someone. Or, well, not hurting someone as much as the actual truth would. Like telling him he laughed like a maniacal grandmother and that his stomach was too big for his clothes. That truth. So she tried to spare him. And he'd called her several times after that, after a few drinks, asking the same question. And a few months later, after he was dating someone else, he had texted her and said, really, will you just tell me what it is about me that made you not want to be with me? What could I have done differently? She had pointed out that according to his social media postings, he was deliriously happy with his new friend. And he agreed, but noted he'd still like an answer. She reiterated all she'd said previously. Are you seeing anyone now? He asked. Well, she went with the truthiness again, sort of, and it made her feel much better about propagating the half-truth. What she'd wanted to say was, what could you have done differently? Everything. To make me happy, to be with me, you would have had to do everything differently, change everything about you, including your body and your jawline and your laugh and your insistence at playing video games on a big screen on Friday nights when I want to be in an art gallery or a martini bar or a poetry reading. And I've been in that relationship where nothing was right about me and everything had to change about me. And I don't want to be in a relationship where nothing is right about you or anything you do. And it would not have been fair for me to stay with you trying so hard to make you into not you. But she couldn't say any of that. Not only would it be hurtful to Jerry, but it would leave her exposed in ways which were not at all acceptable. So in the end, she both hurt him and not hurt him. And in her deepest secret self, she knew she would never have seen him again after that first date, but God damn it had been nice to be wanted. And so she had gone out with him, and therefore she bought all the angst and stupidity that came after that as surely as if she had plunked down an American Express Platinum card and said price was no object. But none of that was his burden to bear, so she couldn't say any of it. Except now, here she was, dateless, at this wedding, and the last person she expected to see was here, with a date. One who was actually far more attractive than she imagined he would land, maybe even, she grudgingly acknowledged, more attractive than she herself in a bleachy, big breast sort of way. Elsie! Gerard called her name again. She squared her shoulders and composed her features. She could handle this. It was no worse than having run unexpectedly into her ex-husband and that bitch at a New Year's Eve party, mere months after he'd returned from Afghanistan and moved in with her. And she'd had an emotional stake in that, the end of her marriage. I mean, sort of. This just ticked her off. Gerard, is that you? She asked, turning, surprise hopefully writ large on her face. I didn't know you'd be here. He leaned toward her as if for a hug, and she felt her eyebrows raise a bit. Rather than meet his embrace full on, she lightly touched her right shoulder to his right, a non-committal and impersonal kind of hug between acquaintances, bodies apart. Low contact. Bleachy hovered just behind his right shoulder, and Else flashed her what she hoped was a friendly half-smile. Hey, it's great running into you, said Gerard. It's been a while. It has been, Else agreed. How are you? Running in to be my ass. Of course he'd known she would be here. Her very close friends were getting married. Who goes to the wedding of people they don't know? They don't know at all. She clenched her teeth in an effort to keep her thoughts behind them. I'm good, said Gerard, nodding his head. There was an awkward silence, and Elsie raised one eyebrow in obvious question, looking pointedly at his date. Oh, Elsie, this is Stephanie, my fiancée. Fiancée? Elsie echoed, seriously. She extended her right hand and her smile, hoping for a look that seemed pleased and warm. There should be a fucking Oscar in her immediate future. Stephanie, how lovely to meet you. Stephanie took Else's hand. Charmed, she said. She turned to Gerard. So, this is Elsie. This is Elsie, he said, still looking at Else. I'm Elsie. That's me, she offered. Short for Elizabeth, which I loathe. Only my mother calls me Elizabeth. Oh, my God, so stupid. My mother calls me Stephanie, said Stephanie. I mean, so do my friends. Just Stephanie. My mother calls me Gerard Michael, said Gerard, clearly missing the undertone of awkwardness between the women. Well, it's super nice to meet you, Stephanie, said Else, glancing at the cell phone clenched as usual in her left hand. I'm helping with the wedding. Need to go check with the bride and make sure she has everything she needs before the ceremony. And get a drink, she added mentally. Thankfully, drinks were readily available given the nightclub setting. And she really did not need to check on the bride, but she really did need the drink. So she popped into the office briefly, assured the bride that decorations of food prep were under control, and after checking in that in fact the bride did not need anything, overpoured herself a glass of champagne and cautiously peered back into the main area of the nightclub. Gerard and Stephanie by the bar, with their back to her. She moved back into the main room. Other guests were beginning to arrive. She scanned for someone she could talk to without having to move close to them again, and spied Candace, who had not been a fan of either Gerard 1.0 or 2.0, and moved toward her. Candace, she said loudly, but not too loudly, because she did not want Gerard to hear her voice. Come drink champagne with me. Candace gave her a suspicious look. Elsie, you're weirdly exuberant for this early. Elsie grabbed her arm and directed her toward the door to the back parking lot. Gerard is here, she chirped. Gerard 2.0, not original? What the fuck would original be doing here? Well, you could have invited him. Okay, I mean, I could have, but no, look at the bar in the ill-fitting suit with the bleached blonde. Why didn't you? Why didn't I what? Invite Gerard 1.0. I don't know, it's a wedding, and he hates things that are romantic. And if he came, he'd have been snarly and drunk halfway through the ceremony. And, okay, focus. Candace, Gerard 2.0 is here with his fiancée. Elsie stage whispered the word fiancé for emphasis. Morgan, their friend, walked up. Kids, what's up? Ooh, champagne. Gerard 2.0 is here with his fiancée, stage whispered Candace, laughing and amused. Else is going to lose her shit. I'm not going to lose my shit. It's just weird. Why the fuck would he be at this wedding? I mean, he barely knows her. He doesn't know him at all. Why is he already engaged? Asked Morgan. That's the more important question. Aren't you guys dating maybe 4 months ago? Right? Asked Elsie. Engaged, and here to rub it in my face. Hasn't he been married 3 times already? Asked Morgan. Well, 4 if you count the fake marriage to one of his military friends, but he insists it doesn't count because they only got married for the military housing allowance or something, so it wasn't a real marriage. Oh my God, not a marriage, just a tiny felony. Candace jumped in. Okay, now we all need champagne. How do you ever have so much drama, Else? Okay, how is this my drama? I would never in a million years have expected him to be here. I'm having a miniature meltdown. You broke up with him. Why do you care he has a fiancée? And why are you so sure he's here to rub it in your face? Well, because he still texts me to see why I broke up with him when he's drinking. He was weird when he said hello, and just because. Else felt deflated. Candace was partially right. She should be non-reactive to this entire thing. Happy for him that he found someone to provide him the level of commitment he wanted and deserved, which she would never have been able to provide. But she doesn't have to be so young. Yeah, that just escaped her mouth. Right out loud. So snide. Okay, I mean, these are my friends. It's awkward to have him here, and it will make me feel off guard the entire night. And it's a social transgression. He must have been invited. I can't imagine he crashed. But when you break up with someone, it's just common courtesy to not invade the places you know they'll be. It's unacceptable. Like, I don't go to Benny's anymore because of Candace cut her off. You have too many rules. Just relax. Enjoy the wedding. He's a nice enough guy. It'll be fine. In fact, it was not fine. Not at all. The wedding had been lovely and weird, as only a self-catered wedding held in a nightclub at 4 o'clock in the afternoon could be. Karaoke had been fun. It had taken a lot of the non-musical guests several drinks to get up the courage to sing, so the alcohol had been flowing. Gerard was among those who downed a few shots and got himself up on stage. He had sung a terribly romantic off-key 80s power rock ballad to Stephanie, who had looked both pleased and embarrassed until Gerard turned his gaze to Elsa's direction for the closing lines of the song. Else blushed, not in the, wow, you're dirty enough to actually get past my generally loose definition of what it's okay to say in public kind of blush, but in the, oh, I'm embarrassed for me and your fiancé and for you, since you clearly don't have the sense to be embarrassed for yourself kind of way. She'd thought the evening could not possibly have gotten worse. She'd been wrong. Gerard had dragged Stephanie and several shots of whiskey over to Else and Candace. Candace immediately hightailed it away. Gerard had gleefully downed his shot, not recognizing that both Stephanie and Else left there sitting on the table, wanting to be anywhere but there. Else stared longingly at hers, wishing she could drink it now, but it was crappy whiskey. Seemed better to try to keep her wits at least slightly about her, even though it had taken her several drinks to get up on stage to sing her song as well. Just tell me, Gerard slurred at her. It was the 4th time he'd asked. Stephanie stood behind him, mirroring their position when Elsie had first greeted them. At first, she'd looked some combination of hurt, embarrassed, and angry, in contrast to her open and pleasant, if uncomfortable, demeanor early in the evening. Now, she just looked pissed. Else gave her one of those looks meant to imply chagrin, a wordless apology. You just have to tell me the truth, just once. It'll be okay. It'll really be okay. Just what is wrong with me that you don't want me, Else, please? Just tell me. Jerry, let's go, said Stephanie, tugging on his sleeve. Hold on, baby, said Gerard. He tugged his sleeve back out of her grip, almost knocking himself over as he did. He did not even look in her direction, but kept his wobbly gaze fixed on Else's face. Else, I deserve an explanation. I do. I can move on, but you have to tell me. You've already moved on, Gerard, with Stephanie. And Stephanie wants to move on now, too, so you should just head home. She felt her inner bitch hovering near the surface, and she already would have blasted him, but she felt so much of Stephanie's pain and embarrassment that taking the high road seemed kinder all the way around. She turned to Stephanie. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Oh, I find that hard to believe. According to him, you're perfect. I mean, I heard about the fabulous Else a lot, but I convinced myself he was over you. He said he was. I guess he was wrong, and I was wrong, so I heard what I wanted to hear. So stupid. I mean, how can I compete with the memory of someone he had the perfect relationship with? The perfect fiancé. The perfect what the fuck fiancé? What? There was no perfect. We went out 5 or 6 times, maybe, over 5 weeks. There was no relationship. What did he say about me? Stephanie laughed again, a harsh and hard sound that hurt Elsa's ears and heart. He said you were going to get married. So basically I'm competing with something that never existed? Well, I guess that's a lesson for me. Don't believe what you want things to mean. How do you compete with the memory of something that maybe never even existed? You can't, can you? It's hard enough competing with reality, with yourself even. But how the fuck am I supposed to win against this, against you, or against a version of you that never even existed? Indeed, thought Else, I fight that every single day. Stephanie turned away, and instead of saying any of the zippy retorts that were waving through her head, Else whispered, I'm sorry, but she didn't think anyone heard her. The end of excerpt.
Yay!
That was a tough one. Cut off in the middle. Brought it back. Amy,
You
thank you
did.
so much
Yeah.
for letting me read this, and I hope folks enjoyed it. And I would love to do this again anytime. And you're wonderful. And happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, well, let's see. And I was having technical difficulties. Like, of course, like, in the middle of the crash and everything, like, I was muted over here and, like, talking about how we were having some problems and whatever. And, of course, nobody could hear me. So, it was,
I feel you.
yeah, it's readings in the time of COVID.
Greetings in the time of COVID. We should write that. In any case, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure, that was great. Okay, so next up we have Rebecca Hodgkins, who is, my second favorite short person aside from myself. And her official bio is this. Rebecca Hodgkins is a freelance editor for hire. I guess that means that, if you like her, you should probably hire her to edit for you. And author of 5 novels. Her short stories have been published in Daily Science Fiction, Edward Bryant's Sphere of Influence, which is a really good collection, by the way, A Fistful of Dinosaurs, several Vagabond volumes, and Amazing Monster Tales, Monster Road Trip, which is also awesome. And I think among other people, Shannon Lawrence has a story in there too. She's been on here. Let's see, I lost my place. Oh, she has a story forthcoming in Amazing Monster Tales Into the Briny Deep. Her plan for world domination consists of being ruthlessly nice to everyone. You can keep up with her on Amazon or at RebeccaHodgkins.com. And I don't know if it's really possible to keep up with her, but some of us try. Okay, good. And I don't have her muted. That's good. It's a good start. You have eerie lighting, Rebecca. And there you go.
Hi. Sorry about the eerie lighting. It just surrounds me. I can't help it.
Okay, well, so does this mean we're doing something scary tonight, or does this mean we're doing something else?
Tonight we're going to do a fairy tale.
Oh, okay.
This is a fairy tale that probably will not be picked up by Disney. So
Sounds like my kind of fairy tale. Like, a really good version of Little Red Riding Hood or something,
there are woods and there is a little girl. So there we go.
Okay, well, I will get my mug off of here and you can take it away.
All right. Tonight's story is called How Baba Yaga's Hut Got Its Legs. Hopefully you're a little bit familiar with Russian folk tales. Baba Yaga is a very scary Russian witch, and this is, well, we'll call it her origin story. How Baba Yaga's Hut Got Its Legs. Once upon a time there was, and there wasn't, an old witch named Baba Yaga. When Baba Yaga was a little girl, she was not very pretty. As such, she did not have a pretty little lamb to follow her everywhere, but an ugly rooster who did horrible things. Baba Yaga lived in a tiny hut just inside the forest at the edge of town. She lived there alone, for her parents saw what she would become, and they were so frightened of their daughter, they ran away under the cover of the night when the girl was 3 years old. From then on, Baba Yaga lived by herself, with only her rooster to keep her company. The people of the town also feared Yaga, but their children did not. They saw her as a nuisance and a pest, and a girl to avoid or to tease, depending on their own temperament. Though the ones who teased her often regretted it. No one loved the little girl or her rooster. So, Yaga only loved her horrible rooster, and the rooster only loved her, because all living things, be they good or evil, must love something sometime. The rooster followed his mistress whenever she went into town, and they caused everyone a great deal of trouble. Baba Yaga was not a quiet, docile girl, and her rooster was not a quiet, docile bird, and together they made a ruckus. Baba Yaga would stomp her feet as loudly as she could, and that was pretty loud since she wore her father's abandoned boots. Her father had not been a small man. The town gossip went that his mother had gone walking in the woods one day and came back quiet and thoughtful. 9 months later, Baba Yaga's father was born. His birth caused his mother's death, so Baba Yaga's father was not liked very much in the town either, because his mother had been beautiful and was considered quite a catch. Baba Yaga's mother married her father out of desperation, because no one else wanted a woman with a twisted foot, considered a bad omen. But the story is not about them. They left it quite willingly at the beginning, and who can blame them? As their daughter stomped as loudly as she could down the main street of the town, her rooster came along behind her, kicking up as much dirt as a tornado. The rooster crowed and challenged every other rooster in the town, and winked at every hen, and at the ducks and the geese, too, for good measure. Nothing intimidated that rooster, because nothing intimidated his mistress. Baba Yaga stomped and sneered and scowled her way through the town. She always stopped in front of the bakery after peering through the window, smearing the glass with her greasy face. Her fat pink tongue ran its way over her thick gray lips as she looked at the cakes and the pastries and the cookies inside. The baker and his wife cringed every time. Anyone in the store immediately left through the back door. The girl stomped and stormed inside, and when she did, everything in the oven immediately burnt to a crisp. The milk turned sour, the butter became rancid, the flour exploded with weevils. She always demanded the finest delicacies, saliva dripping from the corners of her mouth to fall and sizzle on the wooden floor. As if her mouth were filled with hot tallow, the drops left black scorch marks on the wood. And her rooster was worse. The creature never failed to scratch up the wooden floors. His crowing shook the windows, sometimes cracking them like eggshells. Spreading his wings, he'd fly straight at the baker's wife. His grimy feathers sent a fine coat of bitter brown dust to settle over everything in the shop, all the cakes, all the sweets. The baker's wife flailed her arms and shrieked, and it seemed that the rooster's cackle sounded more like a laugh. Yaga herself laughed very hard. She grabbed her swollen belly and she rocked with laughter. It was the only sign of mirth she ever showed. While the baker hurried to fill a sack full of his sweetest tidbits, the rooster scratched and rooted through the spoiled flour, picking out weevils and eating them like raisins in dough. He inevitably became coated with flour, and when he decided to fly back over the counter, the filthy flour joined the dust in covering everything, ruining any food that was left. Now, you may ask why the baker and his wife would ever want to entertain two such foul creatures. They were afraid, certainly, but the gold coin the little girl flipped onto their counter made up for it, at least until the next time. The town was full of boys, as many towns are. These boys were no better and no worse than the boys of any other town, I'm sure. But, depending on who you ask, they were either braver or stupider than most. One boy in particular, Ivor he was called, decided he was done letting an ugly little girl and her horrid rooster tear up his town like it was her own personal toy to play with. After all, that was his job, and she was showing him up. 11 years old and already taller than most of the men, the son of the mayor to boot, he was second only to Yaga in terrorizing the other children, and half their parents, truth be told. But second place was not good enough for the mayor's son. When Baba Yaga and her rooster left the bakery, Ivor was there waiting for her in the middle of the road, blocking the way back to her hut in the forest. He spread his legs wide and put his hands on his hips. "Hello, pretty Yaga," said Ivor. He wore his father's coat for the occasion. "Get out of my way," snarled the girl. "Are the cakes in your sack as sweet as you?" Yaga winced, and she grew a year older when she heard the question. Her rooster scratched deep trenches into the dirt road, sharpening his claws and spurs. Ivor leaned down into her face. I should like to find out. He opened his arms. The sleeves of his father's coat rode up past his wrists. At his signal, the other children came out from behind the houses and shops where they'd been watching. One by one, they crept forward, cautious, until they grouped together and realized how many of them there were, compared to an ugly little girl and her uglier rooster. You've left the bakery empty and we're hungry. Is that any way to treat your friends? Ivor smiled at the other children, who rubbed their bellies in return. At his second question, Yaga aged another year. She clutched her bag of cakes closer. Play with us, sweet Yaga, a game of catch-me-not. If we catch you, we may choose a morsel from your sack. And if I should catch you? She asked. Then I shall have a kiss from your sugared lips. Boy, your lips will burn. Yaga smiled until her long teeth glistened in the sunlight. We'll see what will burn, pretty Yaga. Ivor clapped his hands and the other children scattered. Head for your dirty little hut where you'll be safe. We'll wait in hiding and we'll try to catch you. And when we catch you, we'll steal your treasure. Ivor stepped out of Yaga's way. She and her rooster sauntered past the mayor's son, who swooped down laughing, pretending to grab her. Yaga spit at his feet and burned a hole in his new leather shoe. Her rooster flew into the boy's face and raked his talons across Ivor's big nose. Ivor screamed and stomped, while Yaga laughed. Tag, she said, now catch me not. And away she ran, stomping her father's big boots all through the town. Her rooster cackled and crowed and spun up such a great dust devil that the townsfolk spent the rest of the day sweeping out their homes and streets and praying for an end to the beast. The children in the forest heard their quarry coming from a mile away. The air grew dark with dust, and the ground shook, and their knees knocked together. The youngest ones lost their nerve and ran home. The older children kept in mind Ivor's threats should they run away, and they readied themselves for the capture. Yaga and her rooster entered the forest, the roof of their little hut finally in sight. She laughed to herself, thinking all the children had scattered in fear. She could already taste the sweets in her sack. From behind every tree stepped a child, ready for revenge. They converged on the little girl, reaching and grabbing for her bag of cakes and pastries. She spun and spit, and many children were marked with burns that turned to pestilent moles later on. She pushed through the mob and ran for her hut. Baba Yaga grabbed the doorknob in triumph, still in possession of her sweet treasure. She stepped over the threshold and held the door open for her rooster. And that's when she realized her terrible mistake. Her rooster did not follow. He crowed and he cried, and as the dust settled, Yaga saw that Ivor had him tight in his grasp. The mayor's boy stuffed the bird into a leather sack, stuck out his tongue at the little girl, and disappeared into the trees, followed by several other children. Yaga dropped her sack of sweets and ran after Ivor and the other children deep into the forest. But her father's big shoes caught in the roots and the fallen branches, tripping the girl and slowing her down. The sad cries of her rooster grew fainter until they disappeared altogether. The little girl kicked off her father's boots and carried them as she crept through the darkening forest. She grew lost among the trees and might be wandering there still, were it not for another little girl who doubled back and found her. Vasilisa was afraid of Ivor, but she had no taste for his cruel scheme with the rooster. Clutching her doll, she left the other children to their task and found Yaga struggling through the underbrush. "Why do you help me?" Yaga asked. "Because I want no part of what they're about to do to your rooster." "And what do you want from me, girl, in return for your help?" Vasilisa clutched her doll tighter. "Only your blessing." Yaga laughed at that. "I have no truck with blessings. But should your daughter or your daughter's daughter ever come to me for help, give her your name and your doll so that I will know her." Yaga touched Vasilisa's doll. From that day on, the doll lived on crumbs of bread and whispered good advice to her mistress. "Hurry," Vasilisa said, and she told Yaga where to find Ivor and the other children. With that, Yaga ran as fast as she could through the forest until she saw a fire's red light flickering through the trees. The children danced around the fire and crowed like her rooster. Their mouths were smeared with grease. By the smell of roasting meat, Yaga knew she was too late. Ivor spied the girl and shouted, "Pretty Yaga, come feast with us. We saved you the best parts." And he threw the rooster's legs at Baba Yaga. The other children hurled questions at her, and with each question she grew a year older until her hair hung long and gray, and her pointed nose almost touched her pointed chin. "Grandmother," they called her, "Baba Yaga. How will you terrorize us now with your youth, without your youth, and with your rooster gone?" The ugly old woman picked up what was left of her rooster, the only thing she loved in the world, and the only thing that had loved her back. She put one leg into each of her father's big boots and trudged home. The sack of cakes from the baker sat in front of her doorway. Baba Yaga opened the sack and angrily tossed the sweets around the yard. Where they landed, they became piles of good corn mixed with bad, and poppy seeds mixed among dirt. She took out her rooster's yellow legs and buried them under the hut along with the boots. Then she went to bed. A great shaking and shifting woke Baba Yaga. She ran to her door and looked out. Treetops whirled past. She looked down and saw her hut perched on a pair of giant yellow chicken legs that clawed and scratched and twirled just like her rooster's had. The hut went charging through the forest, straight to where the children lay sleeping around the dying embers of the fire. Ivor awoke first. He looked up and saw an old woman leering from the window of a hut that hopped and danced on familiar yellow legs. As the other children awoke, the legs scratched at the ground like a rooster digging for weevils in flour. The hut swooped down, and Ivor came face to face with the old woman in the window. She reached out her bony arms, and with a fierce strength she grabbed the boy. "Tag!" she cackled. She puckered her lips for a kiss. And that was when Baba Yaga acquired her carnivorous taste for children. As for the rest of them, well, Baba Yaga built herself a picket fence made from their bones to protect her little hut as it danced and spun in the yard. And on each picket, save one, sat a skull too small to belong to an adult. And that was when mothers and fathers learned to warn their children away from Baba Yaga's hut. The end.
That's very good. And it's also a great segue into the next person we have who also wants a fence, but probably for different reasons. So, we'll be hearing about that more in a few minutes. Well, a few seconds probably. But anyway, thank you, Rebecca. That was
Thank you.
spooky. And I totally want a rooster like that.
So do I. Awesome.
Alrighty. So, let's see now. What have we got going on? So I guess like this is just kind of a general announcement, like with the chat. So I've got the YouTube chat going, and I am looking at the comments in there. And yeah, if you're a presenter, unfortunately, this is linked to my YouTube account, so I can only comment as myself, but you know, if you want to log into your YouTube account and comment and stream, you're welcome to. Alright, so now I am going to get ready for Julia Allen. Julia Allen writes comedic fantasy and paranormal romance. She has several published short stories and a number of completed novels which have not yet been released. Julia is the president of Soul Negress Press and an occult practitioner. She lives in Colorado Springs with 2 spoiled cats who believe themselves to be her familiars. So let's see, I'm going to get Julia on the screen here in 1 second. There she is. So, yes, that's quite a lot of fashion. Wow. And sangria.
So, in honor of your birthday and in honor of COVID, I'm doing my impression of Santa Muerte.
Nice. Okay, yeah, and I know you're also in the market for a fence.
Yes. I have a yard in which deer and bears like to stroll through and eat bedding plants. And I'm about to get a pre-owned hot tub, and I'd also like that to be a little more private. So, but the fence is going to be built next week, so I'm happy.
Okay, so you're not going to put like little children's skulls on it or anything like that, or maybe?
I think we're on a don't ask, don't tell basis for tonight.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, I'll let you go forth with your story.
All right. So this is the opening scene, or a couple of scenes, from a novel of mine which has gone through a number of metamorphoses. It started out as a spoof of vampire novels, and then it turned into a serious romance, and then it sort of took on a life of its own and became this epic book with 2 or 3 sequels. But in this era that we're living, I find that laughter is the best medicine, so I've gone back to the very first version of my novel, which is about a very nice and very conservative vampire, and he's involved in politics. He was a presidential hopeful before he went into the wrong absent car, went home with the wrong person, and woke up undead. And so the title of the novel is Red, White, and Blue. And this is chapter 1. Richard Cromwell stood at the crumbling marble balcony, scenting the warm breeze from the bayou, and trying to remember his life as a human. He gazed out over the moonlit landscape. The once manicured gardens of Albion Plantation were now overgrown with kudzu and strewn with fallen tree limbs and bricks, mementos of Hurricane Katrina. A night bird called from the mangroves. Some warm-blooded creature moved in the undergrowth. Richard yawned. He had no interest in small mammals. The kind of prey he wanted walked on 2 legs and voted a straight Democratic ticket. A silken rustling from the bedroom within alerted him. Ariana had risen. Richard tensed, waiting for the summons he knew would come. Whether he would attend the dinner in New Orleans tonight would depend on the requirements of his mistress. That term had a whole different meaning for him now. When human, he'd been one of Denver's most eligible bachelors, but that life was long ago and far away. Preparing himself, he adjusted the gun he wore in a shoulder holster under his tuxedo jacket. Behind it, in an inner pocket, lay the letter he'd received when he rose and had concealed behind an invitation to a $1,000 a plate fundraiser for the Republican National Committee. He gave both papers a satisfied pat. The mere fact that he had joined the undead a little over 3 years ago did not prevent him from showing support for his party or from exercising his Second Amendment rights. Richard. Ariana's voice was smoke and honey. Instantly, he turned to go inside. Lingering in the balcony entrance for a moment, he gazed on the lovely form of the vampiress who had turned him from a corporate master of the universe to a damned creature of the night. Ariana Ellington lounged against a mound of satin pillows in her carved mahogany bed. Moonlight streamed in from the balcony, playing over her lush, rounded breasts and on the shining river of night-black hair cascading over her shoulders. He had to admit, she looked pretty good for a 200-year-old. "Did you rest well, my dear?" he asked. His voice was low and rich, like hers, a mixture of seduction and menace. "I am very well rested." She looked him up and down, taking in the hand-tailored tuxedo and immaculate white shirt. "My, don't we look vampire archetype tonight, first among equals?" Richard suppressed his irritation at the sobriquet, reminding him once again that he was one of several in her harem. Approaching the bed, he bent over her hand to kiss her family ring. "Father, might get him the night off. I have a political dinner in New Orleans." He turned her pale hand over and kissed her palm. "Nothing else would keep me from your side, O Queen of the Night." Ariana preened at her favorite endearment, letting a strap of her silken negligee slip from her shoulder. "Is you speak of pleasure, Richard? Feeding the undead have to make a living, my sweet. Still, it is a shame that you are already dressed." Ariana's eyes met his. Richard attempted to close his mind to her, but as her blood called to his, all conscious thought fled, overpowered by the need to merge body and mind with his maker. Wordlessly, he pulled the tie from his neck and stripped off his jacket. Much better. She watched him remove the holstered gun. "Why do you persist in wearing that crude human weapon?" "Because it pleases me," he said curtly, and added, "O Lady of Darkness." Ariana sat up. "You are vampire now, Richard. Sometimes I think you forget." She kept her eyes trained on his for a moment, then made an impatient gesture for him to continue undressing. Richard unbuttoned his shirt slowly, continuing the unveiling of his body. He was aware she still craved him over all the other males in her nest. He was aware that he was no longer thrilled. He unbuckled his belt and stepped out of his trousers. Seeing his readiness, Ariana's full lips curved slowly in a smile of anticipation, revealing her extended fangs. Richard lifted the covers to join her in their bed. He caressed her pale shoulders and kissed her mouth. Feeling her body rise to his touch, he moved over her. But her next words came as no surprise. "On your back, Richard." A moment, we're having a technical difficulty. Okay, yeah, sorry. Okay, sometime later, Ariana lifted her head from his neck. His blood contained the chronic energy she craved even more than his sexual prowess. Each night she drained his power and replenished her own. A single ruby droplet fell from one fang onto her breasts, snaking its way between them. She touched it lightly with a fingertip and brought it to her lips. "You are keeping something from me, Richard." He stared up at her for a split second before his training took over. He let a lazy smile lift the corners of his mouth and made his next comment light. You know me too well. He saw her eyes darken with suspicion as she searched his mind. Suppressing all thoughts of the document concealed in his jacket, he allowed her to see instead images of her submitting to his sexual mastery now that she had dominated him. Ariana rose from the bed, uninterested in his telepathic foreplay. Not tonight, she said. I too have an engagement. She rang a small silver bell, summoning her personal maid. But perhaps after I bathe, I'll permit you to dress me. That would be more temptation than I could bear, my beauty, and I would be late for my dinner. Very well then, enjoy your boring political friends. Richard entered his marble bathroom, relieved at his narrow escape. The letter concealed in his dinner jacket contained an announcement he'd been expecting for some time. His uncle had succumbed at last to an extended illness. The will, proclaiming Richard's inheritance of the Cromwell fortune, would arrive in a few days. Keeping its contents from Ariana indefinitely would be impossible, but a night apart with his conservative friends would buy him time to plan exactly how and when he told her the news. The serving girl had drawn a steaming tub perfumed with his signature scent. Eternity, what else? She waited quietly to be dismissed. He stepped in, aware of the girl's frank admiration of his body. Richard looked up at her, causing her to blush under his powerful gaze. Bring me a glass of wine, my dear. Chateauneuf du Pape, sir? The 2000 vintage, he nodded. She hurried off. Richard sank into the hot water, easing his sore muscles. Servicing Ariana every night was taxing, even with the superhuman strength of a vampire. Ariana's strength and prowess had increased vastly over the past 200 years. Her demands were great, and her power over him absolute. Not for the first time, he wished human drugs still affected him. A certain blue pill would have come in handy now and then. He snapped his fingers, and the sound system activated, filling the room with Russian gypsy violin music, another of Ariana's affectations. He snapped his fingers again, and the music changed to mellow jazz. Richard turned his thoughts to his situation. As Ariana's protege, he would remain her slave until she formally released him. But the Cromwell legacy would provide a way for him to buy his freedom. Albion, the wreck of a plantation they inhabited, was Ariana's stronghold. 2 centuries ago, she had lived in it as a servant, and now it was one of the showplaces of Louisiana. Her life as an immortal had taken Ariana to many cities, returning only after Hurricane Katrina forced Albion's owners to walk away from the ruin. The floodwaters had raged through the ground floor of the big house, taking furniture and walls as trophies, and leaving mud, debris, and chaos in return. The structural damage was severe enough to condemn the big house for human habitation. Only a personal visit to the authorities in which Ariana used her glamour to hypnotize the committee had allowed her to buy the place and move in. Restoring Albion to its former glory was her single-minded goal. To be the grand lady of the house where she had once been a servant was her dream. Ariana, like most vampires, was wealthy. Amongst the vampires she'd sired were bankers and stockbrokers, whose expertise had swelled her investments and holdings. Her vast collection of museum-quality jewels alone would have bought and sold a dozen mansions. But Ariana, in dragon fashion, was unwilling to part with any of her treasure hoard. The money Richard and the others in the He-Realm earned was more than adequate for the lifestyle she lived, but more was needed to restore Albion to its former glory, much more. Richard was sure his uncle's legacy would provide her with more than enough to completely restore the plantation, and in return, she would surely release him. The servant girl returned with a large goblet of his favorite wine, and his tuxedo freshly pressed on a hanger. "Here you are, sir." She smiled at him from under her lashes. Richard accepted the wine, swirling it gently and inhaling the aroma before he took a mouthful. He sensed the girl's rapidly beating heart and accelerated beating. Like all of the human servants Ariana employed, this one desperately wanted to be elevated to vampire. The girl tossed her long blonde hair over her shoulder and turned her head, displaying a long, pale neck. Observing her erect nipples through her thin blouse, Richard was well aware the girl imagined him turning her in a night of spectacular vampire sex. "Thank you, my dear," he said, keeping his voice neutral, "but that will be all." Watching her leave, disappointed, he vowed again that he would never make a human, even one as willing as she, into a damned creature like himself. And then he let his mind linger on the possibility of correcting her liberal thinking to sane, conservative worldview with only his heart.
Oh my. Okay, so I was muted that whole time. Sorry, guys. All right, so Tom is our next reader. And so in 2018, his novel Kid Buddha won second place in the Zebulon Award for unpublished manuscripts. Can you guys, I'm guessing these are probably delayed messages, in the mainstream literary historical category. And so that is definitely, it's pretty hard to win in that category at all. Actually, it's pretty broad. In early 2019, his story Marky's Package appeared in Artful Dodge 54-55. In addition to fiction, he's posted translations of Japanese short stories, poetry, and music lyrics on his website since 2010. And his website is thomaskichi.com, and I will post that on here as well. Okay, so I'm gonna get Tom on here in 2 seconds, 1 second. There you are.
Here I am.
So the hair is kind of wild and crazy, but slightly different.
Yep. Well, that's what happens when it grows.
Well, yeah, I don't know. When mine grows, it just gets flatter. That's what it does. But you know,
I thought I'd try to go with the quarantine-ness.
The quarantine fatness, it works. Okay, so yeah, I will let you go ahead and tell your story, and hopefully I won't keep myself muted again when I come back. We'll see. Seems to be what I do. So thank you everybody for the heads up, and here's Tom.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Okay, I am going to read a piece of the novel manuscript that Amy mentioned called Kid Buddha. The little piece is it's called The Legend of Suicide Hall. So subject matter warning for suicide if you don't want to hear about that being discussed. It is not described in any detail, though. Great one to end the night with. All right. The Legend of Suicide Hall. I could not tell if Suicide Hall, actual name Kennedy Hall, was precious and sacred to the student body, or just the opposite. Half of the students loved that a nigh abandoned building loomed over the center of campus like a giant weeping willow over a placid lake. The other half were upset the university didn't make use of the building while letting rumors flourish around it. Any way you slice it, when 8 of your students and a professor jump to their death off of a roof at the center of your campus, you're probably responsible for something.
at least a statement or an explanation. But the school has said nothing about it, besides that it was a tragedy. I know because Jay and I researched the incident during the first few weeks of last semester. It was a warm night in October when social sciences teacher Morris Fleming convinced 9 wide-eyed sociology and philosophy students to take part in an experiment. This would be the culmination of years of his studying. In his words, the oscillations of humanity's perception of existence preceding and succeeding the corporeal. By morning, the campus would forever be associated with the suicide of Fleming and 8 of his students, but it would be the disappearance of the 9th student that would invite continued scrutiny for years. It wasn't life that had preoccupied Fleming, but death, or as he called it, time's wick running short. He viewed life as a slow burn down a candle, a flame melting wax away until there was nothing left. Some people's candles were larger than others. Some people had slower burning wicks. Some people's flames were extinguished by accident. That was the sort of idea he was going for. Fleming developed this philosophy over years of poring over multitudes of texts from multitudes of cultures concerning life and death. He wanted to know what every kind of person thought life was about and what they thought happened when it was gone. People halfway around the world or people who were alive centuries ago, it didn't matter to him. By the time of his death, he already considered himself the foremost authority on the subject, although he never contributed anything to the field until the incident, which explained his relative obscurity and subsequent notoriety. The result of his studies, what became Fleming's conjecture, was that the flame of one's life could still burn even after the wick had turned to ash. The flame just needed a new wick on a new candle to burn. When a flame jumped to another flame's candle, the flames join and become one. He dubbed his idea sharing wicks. He argued that one could share wicks with another individual as long as there was trust and love between them. That's how flames never die. They live on in other flames and burn brighter together. I was baffled to find Jay hungrily dissecting this lunatic's work and the incident when he wouldn't even afford a passing glance at the texts for his classes. Even without hindsight, it was easy to see this Fleming guy was off his rocker. You'd think others could see it at the time, but the truth of the matter was that Fleming was a charismatic, persuasive, and well-respected professor within the university, not to mention secretive. When he began preaching to classes about his theories, no one had any cause for alarm. Fleming was just challenging students. That was his way of doing it, they said. The higher-ups love that new age stuff they don't understand. It's the sort of thing that goes in the brochure, gets you tenure, makes you known among the students. This was 30 years ago. The university was still trying to be progressive. After 2 semesters of unhindered evangelizing, Fleming had gained a following of students who began convening together at his home in a sort of secret society. They told no one about the meetings. It was during these discussions that Fleming first proposed his grand experiment. All the students in the society worshipped Fleming. They all had unmoving respect and faith in him, just like any good cultists do. They all believed in the experiment wholeheartedly. It was already deep into that night in October when they ventured to the top of Suicide Hall, then still referred to as Kennedy Hall. They waited for the construction workers, toiling away on the brand new business building nearby, to shut off their floodlights and return home to their families. With no witnesses left on the premises, any factual knowledge of what happened goes dark until 9 bodies were found the next morning, mangled and crushed from the impact of a 6-story plummet. Now, Fleming had recorded meticulous notes of everything having to do with his philosophy and his experiment. The notes did not mention any ritual or cleansing. They focused more on why he was doing things, but not how. His notes, which were discovered post-mortem, indicated there were young students aiding him in the grand experiment that would take place some night during that October, and that when he successfully returned from the experiment, he would have even more information to record. Basically, no one knows why 9 people died that night. Conspiracy theorists ran wild. Was there a discrepancy between what Fleming had intended to happen and what actually happened? Did he want to kill those kids and himself? Did they all want to die? Did something else horrific happen? This shallow well of uncertainty is what fascinated Jay, and me for that matter, Indeed, what did happen on that night? There were 4 major theories, and they were as follows. The first, the society did not intend to commit suicide that night, but were murdered by Fleming. Having obviously been consumed by his research and gone mad, Fleming incapacitated them and threw them all off of the roof, then committed suicide himself after sending the students to their deaths. This was unlikely because there were no signs of struggle, no marks on the bodies to indicate anything other than falling as the cause of death. Examination of the corpses also revealed all of them showed trauma consistent with feet-first impact, leading many to believe they jumped themselves. Another popular explanation was that Fleming and the students were using psychedelic drugs to attempt to reach the afterlife, and unintentionally fell to their death in the throes of a trip. This was 30 years ago, but that was a boring one. Another scenario proposed by news outlets was that the entire thing was a revenge plot carried out by a single student to get back at Fleming and other students for a bad grade in bullying. That was more of a harebrained theory, and as I said, Fleming was generally liked. The last possibility is that it was all intentional suicide in the hopes of finding the answers. This was the most realistic and depressing theory, so it wasn't popular in the news. However, everyone knew it was the most likely. When one looks at the facts, it's the only valid explanation. So here are some of those facts. The bodies were discovered by campus police the following morning around 7:40 a.m. They were heaped together in the crevice between the hill that would become the stone hill next to Kid Buddha's fountain and the base of Kennedy Hall. There were 9 bodies: Fleming, 5 female students, and 3 male students, all dressed in their Sunday best, as contorted and menacingly still as a blossoming thorn apple thicket. All of their shoes were missing. School was canceled. Fire trucks, police caravans, news reporters, everyone who heard about the tragedy flooded the university. The campus was sectioned off with yellow tape like a jigsaw puzzle. The story made all the national newspapers, and the students' families were interviewed over and over. The incident ended up creating a name for the university, or at least giving it some publicity. Analysts went through all of Fleming's writing, just as they do with your average serial killer or captured violent nationalist. When did this all come about? What had pushed this man to such extremes? How had he constructed such a view of the world that he would be able to legitimately believe he was justified in killing people? Just where in this pitiful man's solitary life did he go crazy? That's what they wanted to know. But they didn't find anything. All of his notes were simply scientific observations, essays, procedural tasks for other experiments, some of them dreams. All he had left was his philosophy. There was nothing else about him. The secret society convened for 6 months, according to reports released after the incident, although those investigations couldn't and didn't get very far and became a waste of time for police. Fleming's notes were eventually published in magazines and newspapers after the investigations were closed, but only held public attention for a few days. I only read some of what he wrote, enough to understand. Of course, this was all on par for strange homicide news. People would have completely forgotten about it after a few days if it wasn't for what police found when they scaled Kennedy Hall to examine the ledge from which Fleming and the students slept. The shoes. 9 mangled bodies embedded in the soil below, with 10 pairs of dress shoes on the roof above, all lined up neatly, all facing toward the mountains. It was as if Agatha Christie had written it herself. The shoes captivated people for months on end after the book was closed on the investigation. A phantom began to take form. This 10th person, this mystery student, the left out, it came to be called. A new theory began to take shape. The shoes provided clues and a reason for people to pay attention now. From the shoes, they had a gender and a size. They were male shoes. They were size 10, unless he or someone else was wearing the wrong size shoes. But this was unlikely. All the victims' feet were measured, and every other pair of shoes had a match from the roof. Every pair except for the 10s. Even more digging was done to cross-reference the victims, their friends, their relatives. It became a joke that the application to the university had a spot for you to put your shoe size. Professional and amateur investigators alike tried to crack the mystery of who the student was. It was like a nation of princes searching for a Cinderella. There were no names ever written in Fleming's notes. There were no record of his ever having been in contact with the students outside the university, besides his own notes about the society. The only connection the students had to Fleming, as far as anyone could guess, was that some, but not all, had taken his class and that they all died together. After all the investigations, there were no leads as to who the left out was, besides the shoe size that half of the males at the university could fit into. On top of that, the ghost stories began. The student body propagated a new nickname for Kennedy Hall in the days after the incident, Suicide Hall. The community began to notice strange happenings in and around the building. The hall itself was home to the social sciences at the time. Fleming's old classroom and office were repurposed as storage after the incident. But when reports of odd sensations, your typical paranormal stuff like lights turning on or off randomly, drafts flowing in and out, doors that were previously closed being opened and vice versa, even if they were locked, the rumors began to grow, and the university took notice. Students and faculty started avoiding any association with the building. Students wouldn't go to class in the building. Professors requested room changes on the premise that their students were scared, but actually most of them were scared too. So the whole building was repurposed over and over again. The social sciences left, so math moved in. Math left and it became labs for chemistry and earth sciences. The sciences left and it became offices for the Alumni Association. They left and it became storage and sound stages for the theater department. Eventually, it just became storage. People throwing in boxes of old papers, books, speakers, costumes, and used teaching materials they didn't know what else to do with. All were left to rot in the dusty old building, not necessarily discarded, but put in a place that time seemed to be forgetting. It's a wonder they never just demolished the entire building and used the land for something else, but everyone just wanted to ignore the building instead of face it. It remains to this day a glaring pockmark on the skin of the fresh, modern-age university. During the time the social sciences were leaving and math was going in, which was somewhere between 3 and 6 months after the whole incident itself, a news station, perhaps during a slow week, heard about the strange happenings and dredged up the old writings of Fleming's, and then they whipped up a sensational story that attributed everything to the 9 souls being barred from the afterlife. According to this new discovery in Fleming's writing, they had all needed to jump ship together. But when the 10th student backed out, in true Hollywood fashion, just as the rest of them jumped, the essence of the ritual was tarnished, and the weight of the deceased souls were pressed onto that one living student who hadn't jumped. That's the reason the student has never come forward to shed light on the entire thing, even when the police and news offered rewards for more information, and sobbing families pleaded with the survivor by way of TV camera. But of course, the student didn't come forward. No one ever did. They say that the spirits got to the left out and created a monster from him. The monster, imbued by the victim's animosity, is forever begrudged against the students and faculty of the university. The left out roams throughout the forgotten rooms and corridors of Suicide Hall, waiting for a foolish, misguided young 20-something to come traipsing through all alone and unawares, so that the left out can extinguish that student's flame, steal their candle, and finally move on to the next world with the others. That's how this story went, at least, this legend of Suicide Hall. And here I was, planning to pull open the big wooden doors of Suicide Hall with traipsing on my mind. And that's all. Thanks for listening.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely was appropriate, given my birthday situation and everything,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And thank you for the signal about the muting. This is a record, I think, for me muting myself on this broadcast, but
we want to hear you.
Some people do. Sometimes. Let's see who we got in here that maybe is feeling chatty. We've got, I'll get Deb in here. So she's like, no.
Who's feeling chatty? I'm always chatty.
You're always chatty.
Aren't you always?
I mean, I'm quiet sometimes.
Oh, okay. Griffin is going to come in here too. Let's see, we can get Griffin here. Okay, yep. He's almost here. There he is. Yes.
Hey, how's
So,
it going? Looking a little more like people now.
so you took off your makeup?
The bit was done.
Oh, okay. Fine. I haven't taken off my makeup.
I'm sad I missed it.
Me too.
Do you feel like you should have gotten a little more festive, Dub?
I mean, with the way that Griffin did himself up there, I feel like I at least should put eyeliner on or something.
Come on.
You'd think I don't care about any of you, and I do, I so much do, but not enough for eyeliner. Sorry.
There's the heart. Okay.
It was a good, appropriate start for like 3 of our stories ended up being kind of pretty dark.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just want to say,
For lightening things a little bit with just some bitchiness and no murder.
Bitchiness, no murder, no vampires. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
bitchiness can be fun.
I mean, I'm a
Bitchiness can be
fan,
really fun.
clearly.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know. I love the folklore elements of that last story. You really, that was so much fun.
Thanks, Griffin.
It's always good to have a ghost story, and when you've got like a cult involved, it's like it was a great listen.
I commented, which you probably didn't get to read, but it had like a really delightful modern Lovecraftian feel to it. Like the language was super formal, and I really enjoyed that a lot.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rebecca with her badass
The badass rooster.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that
Talk
was
about
so much
folklore,
fun.
right?
Oh
I
yeah.
love that one too.
really strong voice there too. Rebecca. I don't know if Rebecca's on. Rebecca, you have a really strong voice.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
It was great, and just listening to you read is really fun too. So
Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. This whole night has been great, and I just love the diversity of stories that we've heard here too. So,
Yeah,
Definitely.
well, best headdress of the evening clearly goes to Julia Allen.
yes.
out of the park, Julia.
I'm saying. And having been privy to a couple of iterations of that particular story that she read from, I'm glad we've reverted to the original. It's good stuff.
It was more fun.
Definitely good stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. You guys who listen to this, y'all are awesome. Thanks for being here.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
Amy,
There she is.
there's that headdress.
Thank you so much.
Spectacular.
This was really fun.
It was amazing fun. And Amy, I mean, way to celebrate your birthday. Stories for everybody.
Is this the point where we all count down and do an out of sync happy birthday singing?
Oh no. Well, it's just, we can't have everybody on the screen at the same time, though. It's just, I mean,
Oh, but we can hear everyone. And we can watch Amy get embarrassed.
no.
All right, Deb, you're also on mute, so.
Yes.
And a 1 and a 2 and a skiddly diddly do. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Amy. Happy embarrassing birthday to you.
Okay, let's funeral dirge over now. Happy birthday.
All right. So I will have my drinking here and have the happy birthday song. Let's see. It's really hard to I don't know. This is like one of those things where I feel like, maybe we'd be better off with Zoom because it's like then we could have the Brady Bunch style thing with everybody in the thing because I can only have 4 people up at once. But anyway, like, I guess, I don't know, I'm going to just like cycle through here. I'm going to give you a break, Deb, and you, Griffin, a break, and I'm going to bring our other peeps back on here. Let's see. So who have I got? Okay, so I got Rebecca and Tom back on. Yeah. So yeah, no more happy birthday singing, but yeah, everybody, just those were great stories, and I don't know if anybody wants to talk about like what made them decide to go for the particular thing that they chose to read tonight, but I'm open to it. Okay. Tom politely raising his hand.
Well, actually, I don't want to talk about what I particularly was doing, but despite like technological difficulties and only being able to have 4 people talking, this is still a ton of fun. And I want to give a big thanks to you, Amy, for setting it up, organizing it, and hosting it. It's not an easy thing. So it usually takes someone like that to push us all to do it. So thanks.
Yeah, well, probably make it look a lot harder than it actually is, too. Yes. Oh, yes, Julia.
Well, I was going to read the story that I submitted to the Pikes Peak Writers Anthology, but I timed myself on it, and it was 32 minutes. So I was like, let's rethink this. So I had a very dramatic scene from the end of the same book that I read, and then I thought, let's do something fun. It can be, there's no reason why something can't be bloody and sexy and fun all at the same time, right?
I'm in favor of that. I'm all about that. Yes, Griffin says you're yes.
I love what Jeff said about the babushka, or not babushka.
Baba Yaga.
Like strange and lovely, and I was like, yes, exactly. I love that combination of things, and it was totally like that.
Thank you. I was going to read a different one, which I practiced earlier, but it has such a sad ending. I started choking up, and I'm like, no. So I thought this one was a little, if not lighthearted, at least a little more fun. And I don't know. I think what is it in the in the spirit of the the Decameron, when everybody was sitting around telling stories during the play, I thought, you know what? Let's into the past. Let's do a fairy tale. So
yeah,
that's why.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, it was a great fairy tale, and I just loved it. And I was sorry, I'm distracted by, I don't know, Deb was telling me I need to like have somebody like co-host with me so that someone can handle the technical stuff and someone can handle like the hosting stuff, and I'm kind of like, yeah, probably, because I can't handle it all. So it's like I see things pop up and I'm like, what's that? Oh my god. But anyway, thank you all for being here and for doing this. And Tom has a cat in the background that's, demanding attention. So yeah, I will go ahead and just like do a little sign off here. So I will just kind of blank out my stuff here. Well, wait, I don't want to take myself off the screen yet, because then, it probably will be counterproductive. But yes, thank you everybody for being here tonight. And thank you for singing me happy birthday, even though it was totally embarrassing. And it's embarrassing getting older, but it's like I don't have that problem anyway. I bathe in the blood of virgins, and I keep celebrating my 29th birthday, so it's fine. I've worked it out. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to those of you who have been watching. I hope you keep watching. I am figuring out a date for June, but we do plan to do this again, and I'll be talking to you soon, and we'll be doing this again soon. So thank you very much. Have a good night.